Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. After paying Dewey a quick visit and bringing him up to speed with what was happening, it was he who recommended Harry strike while the iron was hot and take up the lordships of the two founders' houses at the next available Wizengamot session. If you move immediately, he counseled, it won't give anyone time to mount a defense against you acquiring those seats. Can I do that while Gran's acting as my proxy? Asked Harry. Certainly, replied Dewey. The Wizengamot see each house seat as a separate entity. You take each seat, and if you like, you can have a proxy for each. You can also have one or more people hold multiple proxies. Mused Harry. So I can add Gryffindor to Sirius, Slytherin to Cygnus, and activate Gaunt House differently once it achieves noble status. Yes, precisely, said Dewey. But first you have to take those seats in your own right, which means you have to attend the next Wizengamot session in person. Harry sighed and said, at least we'll be on summer holidays by then, and thankfully it will be before our wedding in August. Harry suddenly sat up and said to Dewey, oh, and keep Saturday, the 7th of August, free on your calendar. Daphne and I are getting married on that day, and because we're both under 17, it would be best if my favorite legal eagle is there. Favorite legal eagle? Asked Dewey with a smile. I thought I was the only one. You are, replied a cheeky Harry. That's why you're also my favorite. Dewey just chuckled. With business finally concluded, Cygnus escorted the two teens back to the entrance hall of Hogwarts. A quick see you in just over a week, and he was off, leaving the two to track down their friends. Harry cast a quick tempest and saw that lunch was not that far away. Thinking a bit, he said, I think we should go see Headmaster Flitwick and let him know what's going on first. Daphne nodded and sighed. Yeah, you're right, we should. Together, they headed to the headmaster's office. Approaching the gargoyle guarding the entrance to the stairs, Harry said to it, Hey, open up! The gargoyle leapt nimbly to the side. The two teens looked at one another before Harry shrugged and Daphne smirked. Together they ascended the stairs. A quick knock on the door, and a cold response of "Come in" the professor's lilting voice. Harry and Daphne entered the headmaster's office. Headmaster Flitwick was sitting at his desk. Oh, he exclaimed, nearly falling out of his chair. He quickly rose and came around his desk. Mr. Potter, Miss Greengrass, what a most pleasant surprise. Hello, Professor, smiled Harry as Daphne did the same. We have important news. Do you have time to hear us out? Oh, yes, he happily replied. A quick conjuration, and he had a large love seat sitting high before his desk. Harry assisted Daphne to sit and took seat himself as the little professor went back around his desk and took seat. Once he appeared comfortable, he called a house elf to bring them tea and some light snacks, which were delivered immediately. Now, said Harry, balancing a saucer on his knee in his usual style, you are clearly aware I was kidnapped from the school grounds night before last. Yes, of course, replied the professor. We were also informed you had been rescued and had spent the night and yesterday in medical care. We know little else than that, I'm afraid. That's because information concerning what happened is being kept under wraps for the moment, replied Harry. However, I insisted you be told so you understand. Thank you, Mr. Potter, replied the professor gravely. I appreciate your trust. Harry nodded and said, in a nutshell, I was kidnapped by a plan of riddles, Voldemort's masked morons, his Death Eaters. Flitwick gasped but otherwise remained silent. I was kidnapped because they wanted to use me in a ritual to resurrect Riddle. The first part was to have my blood taken unwillingly, and once Riddle was resurrected, he then wanted to kill me personally. Well, the ritual worked. Riddle was resurrected. However, his intent to kill me by his own hand didn't go as he planned, Harry smirked. Instead, in a one-on-one duel between him and me, I kicked his ass and killed him. Language, Harry, Daphne scolded him. Glancing askance to her, he said, Yeah, but it was apt. You faced Voldemort in a one-on-one duel and defeated him, asked a shocked Professor Flitwick. I sure did, smirked Harry. How? Exclaimed the professor. Professor, exclaimed Harry mock-hurt. "How little faith you have in me." The professor snorted and said, "Don't get me wrong, Mr. Potter, I do have faith in you. But this is a bit much to take." "Well," replied Harry, "it was a combination of things that led to my victory. 1. I interfered in his resurrection ritual, which I believe led to him being unknowingly magically weaker. The Unspeakables agree with me on that point. 2. Do you remember that paper I wrote for you last year about the Weasley twins having the same wand cause from the same animal and how that effect developed?" "Yes, they demonstrated it for me, remember?" replied the professor. "Yes, of course," replied Harry. "Well, I never told anyone I knew this, but I knew that Voldemort, Riddle, and I shared the same wand cause. We both had a tail feather off the same phoenix as cause. And, as so happens, our wands locked up the same way when our curses collided during the duel. Riddle wasn't expecting it, while I sort of was. When it happened, and I was able to push the spell bead back into Riddle's wand, it caused a most unusual Prinori Incantatem effect. It caused the shades of people killed using that wand to be brought forth, including my parents." "Oh, Mr. Potter," said the little professor, clearly feeling for Harry, "I'm so sorry to hear that." Harry took a sip of his tea and waved off the professor's concern. "As well as my parents, it caused to be brought forth 3 other shades, with their help distracting a clearly shaken Riddle. I broke the connection and immediately fired an overpowered blasting hex right into the middle of his chest. The shades had gathered in front of him, blocking his vision, so he never saw it coming. When it hit, it blew a large hole right where his breastbone sat. Very soon after that, he was dead. The third point, my rescue party had already arrived and were waiting for me to get into a position where they could rescue me without me being killed by all the masked morons surrounding Riddle and me. That came when the Priori Incantatem effect kicked in. While I kept our wands locked and had the protective spell cage around the pair of us, my rescue party blew the living hell out of all the masked morons. None of them survived." "How many were there?" asked the professor, concerned. 16, replied Harry, "and I regret to inform you one of them was Severus Snape." The little professor sighed. "Some of the staff will be very sorry to learn that." "And they will," said Harry. "But you may only tell them he is dead, not how he died. Not yet, anyway." "Yes, I understand," nodded the professor. "Thank you for telling me that." "What you can be happy to take away from this, Professor," said Harry, "is that Voldemort is truly gone. This time, the prophecy sphere that foretold Riddle and I would face each other and that one of us would die at the hands of the other has been completed. The Unspeakables assure me it's over. No more Voldemort, ever." The professor looked at Harry in shock. "There was a prophecy that foretold you and Voldemort would face each other and one of you would die." "Yes, Professor," said Harry, taking the blackened orb out of his pocket. "It was told to Dumbledore by Trelawney in late 1979 or early 1980. Dumbledore knew it and had been trying to control it, and me ever since. That's why he sent the Longbottoms and my parents into hiding. That's why Riddle attacked my parents. That's why the Lestrangers and Crouch attacked the Longbottoms. That's why he hired such a ditz as Trelawney in the first place. And that's why Dumbledore was so bloody interested in me personally when I first turned up as a student here in September 1991. The prophecy was, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as equal. But he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies." "Sweet merciful Merlin," Flitwick exclaimed, "that is what this has all been about?" Harry simply nodded. "And it's really over?" asked the professor. Harry held up the sphere and nodded with a smile. The little professor sighed in relief, and not a little contentment. "Albus kept telling us he knew Voldemort would be back. He just wouldn't tell us why he believed that. Now I know." "Dum-Dum still doesn't believe it, though," said Harry, "not even when the Unspeakables showed him that the orb is now black and smoky. The man has this grand plan for what's supposed to happen, and now it won't, but he doesn't truly believe it." Albus was always of firm conviction in what he believed, said Flitwick. No one could ever shake sense into him. And you'll be able to tell the rest of the staff the truth in a few days, said Daphne. However, there's more to tell you. Looking back sharply, the professor gestured and said, Go on. First, because Harry had to claim emancipation to escape participation in the Triwizard Tournament, she said, it enacted a clause in our betrothal contract that states we have to be married this summer. That wedding will take place on the 7th of August, and you'll receive your official notification shortly. The little professor practically jumped for joy. Ha! He exclaimed. Minerva, Professor McGonagall, is going to be owing me big for this. Calming down a little, he said, there was a bet among the staff as to when you'd actually be married. I had laid my bet you'd marry this summer due to a clause in your well-known betrothal contract. Betting on your students' romantic involvements, Professor, smirked Daphne. For shame. However, the little half-goblin professor wasn't the least ashamed. So you'll be needing married quarters next year. Yes and no, Professor, replied Daphne. Oh, he asked, curious. That brings us to the next piece of news, she replied. When Harry killed Riddle, the Unspeakables made him claim his houses by right of conquest. At Gringotts, this morning, it was confirmed Harry is now also Lord Slytherin. Flitwick, who was taking a sip of his tea at the time, sprayed his mouthful of tea across his desk. Harry looked amusedly at Daphne and said, You timed it that way on purpose. She just smirked back as the little professor tried to apologize and vanish the mess. That's still not all, Professor, said Daphne. Flitwick hesitated for a moment before Harry saw him deliberately setting his cup aside. Go on. When we confirmed that Harry was the rightful heir of the noble and ancient house of Slytherin, she said. The same test also showed that he was the rightful heir of the noble and ancient house of Gryffindor by primogeniture, and the head of the ancient house of Gaunt by right of conquest. As of right now, Harry holds 3 lordships. He will add a 4th when Gaunt is soon elevated to noble status, a possible 5th when my father passes away, and a possible 6th if Sirius Black dies without naming a different heir. Harry started. He'd forgotten all about the House of Black. He'd now try and get Sirius married off as soon as he could. Of course, as he's now the lord of 2 of the founders' houses and the 2 senior member houses. At that, he also owns Hogwarts. You now work for Harry here, headmaster. And when we return for our 5th year next September, we'll be taking residence in the owner's chambers for either Gryffindor or Slytherin, probably Gryffindor. Flitwick looked utterly dumbfounded. Harry rose from his seat and leaned over the headmaster's desk. He allowed first the Gryffindor ring to show, then the Slytherin ring to show. He then retook his seat. The headmaster shook himself out of his shock and said, Well, that's a turn-up for the grimoires. When do you go public with that last bit? That depends on Luna Lovegood and her father, replied Harry. I'm hoping the next edition of the Quibbler isn't released until after the students depart for the summer. If it's due earlier, I'm hoping they'll either delay it or publish the news in the next edition. Daphne said, We don't want to shock the student population with this. If we can hold back on the news until after they leave, that'd be fantastic. However, if it is discovered sooner, we won't deny it. Flitwick nodded and said, Then that'll give me time to ensure the staff aren't just as discombobulated by this as the students. Tell them earlier, if you like, said Harry. You just can't tell them about Slytherin or Gaunt until the story of Riddle's ultimate death is released. That shouldn't be too long, but by all means, tell them about Gryffindor. Oh, and a final point, said Harry, getting quite serious and a little sad. At least 4 of your students lost their fathers 2 nights ago. Flitwick sighed and drew out a sheet of parchment and a quill. Go on. They are Draco Malfoy, Theodore Nott, Vincent Crabbe, and Gregory Goyle, that I know of. There may be others, but those are the ones I know of who had fathers at Riddle's resurrection and were killed on the night. In Mr. Malfoy's case, he also lost his godfather Severus Snape. There may be other relationships there that affect other students, and of which I'm currently unaware, such as uncles. After finishing their teas and wishing the headmaster well, the two teens headed down to the Great Hall to see if their friends had arrived for lunch. If not, they'd head up to the 7th floor and hoped they'd not pass each other on the way. Entering the Great Hall, Harry and Daphne saw the group sitting at the Hufflepuff table and headed over. "A team," said a very upbeat Harry. "Miss me?" "Harry!" exclaimed Hermione, who jumped up and gave him a Hermy hug. She was joined by the other girls, including Luna. Not wanting to be left out, Neville only hesitated just a jot before also moving in for the group hug. When the group backed off, Hermione fired questions at him. "Are you all right? Is everything okay? When did the healers release you? Are you in any trouble? Does your family know? Do you know if you can sit the exams you missed?" Harry suddenly raised both hands and exclaimed, "Wow! Hermione, breathe, girl!" Hermione's jaw snapped shut with an almost audible click before she blushed bright red. Harry smiled and replied, yes, last night, no, yes, and I don't know." If anything, Hermione's blush turned even darker before she suddenly grinned and poked her tongue out at him, as the rest of the group laughed. "Lady Hermione," Harry mock scolded, "that is no way for the lady of a noble and ancient house to behave." "Oh, yes it is," said Hannah. "Least, it's the way for a lady to act towards Harry." Then it was Harry's turn to poke his tongue out. Once they finally retook their seats, and in Harry and Daphne's case, for the first time, they settled down to eat lunch. They were interrupted by a few various well-wishers who dropped by to ensure Harry was all right. But so far, none of them understood the true danger Harry was in, or just didn't really care. For the most part, the conversations went like this. "What happened to you, Harry?" asks the well-wisher. "I was kidnapped by a group of masked idiots," replies Harry. "Oh, that's terrible," they'd exclaim. "How'd you get away?" "I was rescued by family, friends, and law enforcement, who tracked me down," he'd reply. "I didn't get out of medical care until last night." "Well, you look all right now," they'd say. He'd give a shrug and say, "They fixed me right up," and then they'd move off. Lunch, which should have taken them only about 40 minutes from start to end, ended up taking over an hour and a quarter. As soon as they could, the group made a run for the 7th floor. Once everyone, including the twins who met them on the way, was settled down, Harry went through everything that happened in greater detail, including what happened at Gringotts. "So, wait," said one twin. "You're now Lord Gryffindor and Lord Slytherin." "Yes," replied Harry, with a grin. "And Lord Potter and soon-to-be Lord Gaunt," said Daphne. "Plus, you'll one day probably be Lord Greengrass and maybe Lord Black," said a grinning Neville. "So, get out these debt lists," said Hermione, sitting forward and eager for more work. "Let's go through them. You said the Unspeakables want you to move fast on this, didn't you?" Daphne grinned while Harry groaned. However, he pulled the lists out of his book bag and placed them in 3 piles on the table before them. "All right then," said Daphne after they'd gone through the lists. She picked up the new sheet of parchment she'd written upon and said, that is, Harry calls in the debts for Avery, Bagman, Carrow, Crabbe, Crouch, Dolohov, Gibbon, Goyle, Jugson, Lestrange, McNair, Malfoy, Mulciber, Knott, Ogden, Parkinson, Prince, Rosier, Selwyn, Snape, Trevors, Umbridge, Wilkes, and Yaxley. Where necessary, he cancels debts out due to how much he owes that family. And you want to excuse the debts for Abbott, Blackbones, Croker, Dagworth, Granger, Davis, Diggory, Greengrass, Longbottom, Macmillan, Marchbanks, Peasgood, Smith and Weasley, and leave as is for the rest. "Correct, correct," sighed Harry. "I feel that excusing those debts shows those houses I'm an honourable and forgiving man, and someone who would make a good ally. Now, since I have to move substantial funds around, anyway, to put enough into the accounts for House Gaunt to elevate it to noble status, I may as well move funds about for the other houses while I'm at it. Hell, the Potter accounts are so massive no one would have a hope of even spending all the interest, let alone the principal, in 10 lifetimes. I think I can put it to some good this way." "All right," said Daphne. "I'll draft up the letter to send to Bloodfang of the Goblins and get things moving to recover those debts." "So fast?" asked Susan. "Yes, said Neville. "If I was to be a betting man, I'd say the minister will try his damnedest to seize the vaults of the deceased Death Eaters, masked morons, as Harry calls them, before Harry would get a chance to claim back the debts." Daphne nodded and said, "They did it in the past during the last war. And take a look at what they did to House Dagworth Granger. Most of the funds from that house, I guarantee you, would have ended up in the private vaults of the Dark families." "Which brings me on to the next point," said Harry, as he glanced at Daphne. "Partly because I was very nearly killed 2 nights ago, and because I don't want to see the situation where the Ministry gets its sticky claws into my various fortunes, Daphne and I are agreed that I need to name some heirs presumptive. I also hope that these titles will also only be temporary, as we hope we'll start having children in a few years that we can pass these titles on to. First," he continued, "Neville, I'm officially recognizing you as heir presumptive for the noble and ancient house of Gryffindor." Neville started in shock and spluttered, "What? Aye, pardon?" "We checked, Neville," smiled Daphne. "You, or rather, your father, is likely the heir presumptive for Gryffindor. Harry's just skipping your father and appointing you direct." He said, "Wow, wow." Harry grinned and asked, "Are you all right with that, Nev?" Yeah," he replied, still in a little shock. "Thank you," said Harry. "Second," he said, moving on and looking at Hermione, "I'm officially recognizing Hermione as heir presumptive for the noble and most ancient house of Potter." "Eep," she exclaimed, even more startled than Neville. "No, Harry, just no." "Oh, why?" "Again, we checked," replied Daphne. "You're more than eligible for the title due to your relationship through your ancestor marrying a Potter. However, Potter is one of the titles, at least, that will be passed to our first son or daughter." "Are you all right with that, Hermione?" asked Harry. Still in shock herself, Hermione replied, "As long as you promise me you'll have children to pass these titles on to, that they're only temporary, then yes, I accept. Thank you." "Good," said Harry. "And thank you. We still have to go through the bloodlines for Slytherin and Gaunt," said Daphne. "However, as both houses are now conquests, Harry can name whoever he wants as heirs, irrespective of bloodlines and primogeniture." "Just so," said Harry. "That's why I'm naming Sirius as heir presumptive for Slytherin, and Aunt Amelia as heir presumptive for Gaunt." Susan's eyes widened in recognition of the honor. "Why?" she asked, almost as startled as the other two. Harry smiled and said, "It's in recognition of the place the House of Bones has in the hearts of the House of Potter. Aunt Amelia was named by my parents to be one of the choices for my guardianship. I'll need to have a will drawn up, but it cannot really be lodged until after the wedding. Anyway, any existing wills at that time could be overturned because marriages tend to negate a lot of things like that. So we'll be sitting with Dewey as soon as school winds up for the year, and we'll have the relevant clauses inserted into the wills. At the completion of the wedding ceremony on the 7th, I'll then sign the new will. I'll also be having mine drawn up and sign mine at the same time," said Daphne. Harry nodded and said, "I want to see Daphne complete her education before we start having children, and if she's intending to undertake a postgraduate study of some form, such as an apprenticeship, children will not be coming until after that without the permission of her master or mistress." Daphne leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. "So it's going to be a few years yet until we have children we can switch to new heirs presumptive," continued Harry. "So, to wrap things up," said Daphne, "news concerning the ultimate defeat of Riddle is being withheld for now. However, with the number of people who were involved that night, it'll break any day. I'm surprised it hasn't already, concerning how poorly the Ministry are able to keep secrets. We know that Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, and Nott, at least, lost their fathers on that night. I suspect that news will break either tomorrow morning or on Monday. It's unfair to withhold that sort of news from them, even if they are complete wankers." "Language, Harry," said both Daphne and Hermione. With a shrug, Harry continued, "I believe Aunt Amelia's people have been running about yesterday and today informing the widows, and those widows will want to inform their sprogs. The information blackout won't last much longer after that. As majority shareholder of the Daily Profit organization, I have a responsibility to the other investors to consider. "And that reminds me," he said, turning to Luna. "Dear Luna, I owe you an interview for the Quibbler. If it's all right with you, I'd like it to cover what happened 2 nights ago and what it means concerning Riddle and his masked morons. Can we get it out of the way now?" "Oh yes, Harry," she brightly said, quite pleased. "There's an issue due on Friday, the last day of the school year. I suspect Daddy may want to bring the issue forward with news like that." "That would be perfect," smiled Harry. "But the longer he can hold off distribution for the week, the happier it'll make my life here." "Shall we use the dicta quill and begin now?" she asked. "Well, if no one else has any other questions, why not?" he replied. Harry and Daphne, with Hermione providing the part she played, gave Luna the exclusive on what happened. It took almost as long to tell about as it took to happen. However, the 3 of them found it quite cathartic to speak about it. Harry also included details about the prophecy and how the prophecy was determined to have been satisfied by showing the now darkened orb. Luna asked if she could have young Mr. Creevey take a photo of Harry holding the orb, and maybe take a photo of the little Hangleton graveyard where it all happened. Harry gave his approval. When the interview was finished, Luna excused herself and moved over to one of the study carousels to write it all up. The next morning, Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, Knott, Parkinson and a few others disappeared soon after breakfast. It wasn't too much longer before Daphne and Tracy reported to the others that the missing students were now aware of the deaths of their fathers and other loved ones. They'd been taken home and would likely not be returning until the next year. That evening, Headmaster Flitwick made the announcement only that the missing students had lost loved ones and had gone home in their grief, nothing else. However, Harry did receive a message from Professor Babbling that the headmaster wanted a word with him after the meal. He nodded to her that he understood. He and Daphne, after the meal, walked to the headmaster's office. Again, as they approached the gargoyle, Harry called, "Oi, you! Hop aside!" and the gargoyle did just that. Daphne giggled. Entering the office, Harry saw that a large open space had been cleared before the desks. Within was a circle of chairs, with a single love seat. Harry almost laughed when he saw that the love seat had the crests of Potter and Greengrass proudly displayed high up on the backrests in the centre. In the office was Headmaster Flitwick, with all the professors. They waited quietly. As Harry was assisting Daphne into her seat, she said, "Harry, I do believe you may be facing the Inquisition." "No," he replied with a grin, as he took seat himself. "They just want to ask a few questions, that's all." Headmaster Flitwick was grinning back. "To bring you up to speed with what I've had to inform the staff. Mr. Potter and Miss Greengrass, they're aware of the following facts. You were kidnapped on the night of the 3rd task. The offenders were Death Eaters. You were then rescued by friends, family and law enforcement, and the Death Eaters were killed during the rescue. Next, they're also aware you've been into Gringotts to have a more in-depth analysis of your rightful lordships and have discovered, as well as being Lord Potter, you're also Lord Gryffindor and Lord Slytherin. That caused a few of the professors to squirm a little in their seats, and that goes with your status as heir presumptive for the House of Black, soon to be heir presumptive for the House of Greengrass, and that you're the current head of House Gaunt, a house soon to be elevated to noble status. Do I speak true?" With a nod and a smile, Harry replied, "You do, Headmaster." "How is this possible?" exclaimed Professor McGonagall. Harry chuckled and said, "To learn that, we're going to need oaths from you all. The oath will only exist long enough for the official news to be released by us or the Ministry, which should be no more than about 5 days." There was a fair bit of grumbling, especially from the newer staff members, but they each gave their oath. "To start," Harry began, "I need to take you back to late 1979 or early 1980, and how Professor Trelawney over there, during her interview with Albus Dumbledore for the then vacant Professor of Divination slot, unknowingly dropped into her seer state and gave a prophecy. Harry and Daphne then covered how they'd been working with a few people and the Department of Mysteries to hunt down the soul fragment containers they withheld using the word Horcrux. What happened on the night of the 3rd task, what Croker had him do the next day, and going to Gringotts. While they were then being questioned, they explained that Dumbledore knew all about the prophecy, Harry's part in it, the real identity of Voldemort, the soul containers, and everything else. Together they then explained how they were getting married on the 7th, and instead of moving into student married quarters, would be moving into either Gryffindor's or Slytherin's owner's suite on their return to school next September. But that no one knows where they are, or even if they actually exist, said McGonagall. They do, and I know where they are, said Harry. It's part of the information contained with the rings. And he held up his hand, displaying each of the 2 rings in turn. So you own Hogwarts? Asked Professor Dinwiddie, the potion's mistress. I and the other 2 rightful heirs do, yes, he simply replied. However, as the other 2 rightful heirs have yet to be identified, I automatically act as proxy for them when it comes to Hogwarts business. And to answer the next question before it's asked, yes, that effectively makes me your boss. However, before you get upset about it, I have no intention of taking the position from Headmaster Flitwick or interfering in any way with the academic running of the school. That's entirely Headmaster Flitwick's and Deputy Headmistress Sprout's job. Instead, I'm going to be disbanding the School Board of Governors during the break and replacing them with an advisory board of my own choosing. The existing board will be cut down and replaced with people I trust to advise me. Now that 2 of the heirs have been found, even if both are a single student, there's no longer any need for governors. The board will be informed of their disbanding once this all becomes public. At that time, one of the first orders of business I will be taking care of will be to make the positions of headmaster and deputy headmistress for Professors Flitwick and Sprout permanent. Unless, of course, they don't want it. But I'll discuss that with each of them privately at another time. By the expression on the little professor's face, Harry could already tell Flitwick would accept. He wasn't so sure about Professor Sprout. After discussing a few other points, Harry promised to return the next day to provide them with more information. For now, the time was getting late. Leaving the headmaster's tower, Harry stopped Daphne and asked, "Do you want to have a look at each of the founders' suites right now?" "No," she said, after thinking about it for a few moments. "Let's wait until tomorrow and invite the group to go and have a look with us." Harry nodded, smiled, and said, "Good idea. I'm sure they'll pester us about them if we don't take them with us." Daphne smiled back and said, "My thoughts, exactly." Harry then escorted Daphne back down to the Slytherin common room before heading for the Ravenclaw tower. At breakfast the next morning, Harry was worried about what the morning mail would bring. He'd managed to chow down on a reasonably filling breakfast with his friends at the Slytherin table, and was drumming his fingers on the tabletop in a staccato rhythm while waiting for the owls to arrive. Twice, Susan reached out and pushed down on his fingers in a futile effort to get him to stop. Both times, he looked at her and sheepishly apologized with only a smile. When they started to stream in, he kept his eyes scanning the ceiling space looking for Hedwig. He almost missed her when she glided in, banked around over the head table, and came stooping towards him. When she landed, he offered her both a big smile and 3 strips of bacon, as he quickly stripped her of her load of the Daily Prophet and a letter. The letter was from Cygnus, explaining that the story had broke. With a sigh, he quickly opened the Daily Prophet, looking for the story. He found it on the bottom of the front page. The reason for the mark. Many who attended the final task will remember some miscreant fired off the dark mark into the sky just before the final task was to be started, reports Special Correspondent Monty Wordsworth. This is similar to what happened during the early hours of the next morning following the Quidditch World Cup. What many don't know is that one of Hogwarts' own, our newest lord, was abducted on the night. Through means unknown, a rescue party of our finest Auroras set off in pursuit. They eventually caught up with the culprits in a graveyard in a small village in northern England near the Scottish border, and not far from Newcastle upon Tyne. It is believed the perpetrators were involved in a ritual most foul when the rescuers arrived. A great battle commenced, during which many of our previously respected pillars of community were killed. The perpetrators fought to the last man, and our newest lord was saved. Below we have included a list of those who died that night. We have held off on reporting them earlier out of respect for their families. We have also been informed information has been withheld for now, but will be made available once investigations are complete. We have been assured that will occur sometime next week. We at the Prophet are thankful our brave law enforcement officers were on time to rescue our young hero, and hope he will soon be able to put this horrid incident behind him. The list of names included all the ones Harry knew to have died. However, some were also missing. Thankfully, the names of the masked morons were all named as perpetrators, while the names of the fallen from the rescuers were named as rescuers. Looking up from the article, Harry turned to Daphne and said, "Well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be." "No," she smiled. "However, you're probably going to get further questions from other students as to what happened." Frowned Harry. Motioning for the others to draw in closer, he said, "If anyone asks you anything about this, other than they already have, please just say the Auras are still conducting their investigations, and you'll have to remain silent about it until it's all made public. Hopefully, that should stave off a lot of the questions." "Yes," said Susan, "but it will do nothing to stop the rumors flying. This is one of those times where the rumors will do less damage than the truth," said Harry. "Luna's article in the Quibbler will answer all their questions before they head home. I hope. It won't stop them," she sadly smiled. "No, it won't," he said. "However, all they'll get out of me after that is, the Quibbler has all the information I'm willing to divulge on the subject. I suggest you acquire a copy of it and read it for yourself. I think I'll be giving that answer a couple of dozen times once the story has broken wide open." As the group sat in silence for a few moments, Daphne said, "Well, I for one want to go and have a look at these founders' apartments. We'll probably be spending our last 3 years of schooling here within. Shall we go?" With a grin in response, Harry stood and assisted Daphne to her feet. Once everyone was up, he led the way out of the hall. Many eyes followed them, especially him, but he was more than used to that. Not far from the new entrance to the infirmary on the 3rd floor, Harry showed them a huge portrait of a roaring griffin that went almost to the floor. "It's behind here," he said. He stepped forward and showed the griffin his ring. "I am Lord Gryffindor. Please open." The griffin in the painting, which no one had seen move before, turned its head to look at Harry and the ring upon his hand. Upon seeing it, the griffin turned more fully to face Harry and said, "Welcome, young Lord Gryffindor. It has been many a year since I last hosted one of your password." Harry hesitated a bare moment before he said, "Courage under fire." The griffin bowed as the painting slid smoothly along the wall. Once it had gone far enough, Harry saw that the small section of wall that was below the portrait was actually the riser for a step. It was the bottom step of a half-flight leading up. He led the others up and to a door that opened as he approached. Stepping within, he was in a small, for want of a better term, living room. As the others filed in behind and were looking around, one of the castle elves popped in. "Lord Gryffindor," it bowed. "Welcome, sir. We have awaited you for a long time." "Hello," said Harry. "And who are you?" "I am called Frosty, my lord," Frosty replied. Hermione snickered. "That's the name of a mascot for a Muggle breakfast cereal," she said. Harry grinned at her and said, "I remember. My cousin loved them." Looking down at the elf, he asked, "Care to show us around?" "Of course, my lord." The elf bowed again. He suddenly popped over to a door on the right side and said, "In here you will find a small potions laboratory." Harry walked over and looked within. Indeed, it was a small potions lab, complete with racks of empty potions vials, a shelf with cauldrons, drawers with athames and bolians, a cabinet of empty jars ready for potions ingredients, and a wash station. Next door, still on the right, was the armory. Most of the wall hooks were bare, but there was obviously room for many and various weapons. The elf then led them across to the other side of the living room, the left-hand side. "In here is a small kitchen and pantry," he said. Again, they filed in and looked around. The kitchen was large, with a large stone oven with a huge hot plate on top. In the middle of the room was a large table with old-fashioned chairs sitting around it. Off to the side was an empty pantry. Back in the family room, the elf stood at the foot of a flight of stairs that were alongside the stairs leading up from the entry. "Up here, my lord, is the bedroom. Hogwarts has also provided an attached bathroom." Giving a shrug, Harry led the group up the stairs and into a huge bedroom. It was almost of the size of the living room downstairs. In the middle of the opposite wall sat a huge four-poster bed, draped in reds and golds. Through a door off to the side and near the opposite wall they found a huge bathroom with a sunken Roman-style bath. Next to that, on the same wall, nearer to the stairs they just ascended, was a walk-in robe with plenty of hanging and shelf space. Back in the living room, Harry gathered his friends. "Well, what do you think?" Hermione grinned and said, "It needs modernizing." "Yeah, it does," chuckled Harry. "Hang on." Turning to Frosty, he said, "Frosty, can you modernize this place for us? Lady Daphne and I may want to use this place when we return to school on the 1st of September next year." "Frosty can do that," he replied, before drawing himself up. "Frosty would be honored to do that." "Thank you, Frosty," smiled Harry. "I shall leave things in here with you then." Turning to the others, he said, "Shall we go and have a look at Salazar's private quarters?" "Oh, yes, please," said Daphne. As they walked down the stairs, the back of the portrait of the Griffin slid to the side, allowing them egress. Leading them just down from Godric's private quarters, Harry came to a blank section of wall. He scanned it carefully. "What are you looking for?" asked Susan. "There's supposed to be a small carving of a snake in the middle of one of the bricks here somewhere," he replied, not taking his eyes off the wall. The others then moved forward, scanning the large stones bricks. "Here," said Hannah, indicating a section of wall. Harry moved over and looked for himself. He saw it carved in low relief directly into the stone. "Okay, back up," he said, backing away a little. When he was a couple feet away, he concentrated on the snake carving and, in parcel tongue, said, "Open in the name of Lord Slytherin." The small carving seemed to enlarge, and the snake, a basilisk he could see now, turned to look at him. He showed it the ring. It looked to study the ring for a few moments before it said, "I recognize you, Lord Slytherin. A new password, if you would." Concentrating a little to speak English again, Harry firmly but quietly said, "Cunning and guile." The snake carving nodded once, accepting the password, before it reverted to its normal form. As soon as it did, the bricks started to fold out of the way, similar to the portal into Diagon Alley. The carving of the snake had moved to a position alongside the arch. "Wow," whispered Tracy. "Wow, indeed," smiled Harry back. When the movement ceased, they were looking at an archway that led down a half-flight. Moving down the stairs, Harry came to a door. He opened it and stepped into a just as large, if not larger, living room as the rooms of Gryffindor, now a floor above them. Again, an elf popped in. "Greetings, Lord Slytherin," it bowed. "Hello there," said Harry. "And you are?" "I am called Maisie," it replied. "Care to show us around?" he asked with a smile. The Slytherin rooms were, indeed, similar to the Gryffindor suite. However, the potions laboratory was much larger and the armory much smaller. The kitchen was of a similar scale, and they were flipped with the potions lab and armory of the left and kitchen on the right. However, instead of one huge master bedroom up a short flight of stairs, this flight of stairs led down to two similar-sized bedrooms. Each had its own bathroom and walk-in robes. "Why two?" asked Tracy. "Lord Salazar Slytherin often had his sister come to stay," replied Maisie. Back in the living room, Harry thought hard about something. He had an idea. "Maisie," he asked. "Yes, my lord?" "Can the apartments of Gryffindor and Slytherin be linked through an internal flight of stairs?" asked Harry. The little elf took on an expression that looked like she was staring off into the distance for a few moments, before she snapped out of it and looked back at Harry. "Yes, my lord," she said. With an almost audible groan, a new doorway appeared alongside the door leading to the egress. "Through there, my lord," said Maisie. Harry walked over and opened the new door. Beyond was a narrow flight of stairs leading to the right. He quickly ascended them and opened the door at the top on the right. Again, opening the door and walking in, he found himself back in the Gryffindor suite living room. "Excellent," he beamed. "Maisie, Frosty." The two elves appeared standing alongside one another. "I want these suites to stay interconnected just as they are, all right?" "Yes, my lord," they both said with a small bow each. Daphne giggled. "Only you would think of linking them to make one massive apartment." Harry grinned back. "And what are you going to do with all this room?" asked Tracy. You've now got 3 bedrooms with their own bathrooms, 2 kitchens, 2 armories, 2 living or common rooms, and 2 potions labs spread over an effective 4 levels. Now that I know I can do it, and have done it, he replied, I'm going to have to give it a lot of thought. However, I'm thinking of converting one of the living rooms into a collective study area, and dining room, one of the potions labs, and one of the kitchens into bedrooms for guests, and one of the armories into a personal library cum office. So, 5 bedrooms then, said Tracy, thinking of starting that family early. Are you? She smirked. Harry started before he realized she was just teasing. Well, I was thinking, since Daphne would be living here with me from September, you might want one of the existing bedrooms in the Slytherin suite. However, he sighed, since you're going to pick on me. Tracy squealed and just about tackled him to the ground with her big hug. No, I was just teasing. I'll be good, I promise. Laughing as she clung to him, babbling away, the others joined in. Come on, he said, chuckling. Let's go back down to the Slytherin suite and see what we can do about converting and modernizing the combined suites. He led the way back down to the Slytherin living room. Calling Maisie and Frosty again, he said, All right, you two, here's what I want you to do to convert the 2 suites and to have them ready before the 1st of September. The elves listened closely as Harry gave them their instructions. His friends, especially Daphne, gave their own suggestions. Both elves were eager to get started. That afternoon, Harry and Daphne rejoined the headmaster in his offices for an extensive planning session. Something I want each member of staff to do over the coming few weeks is to make a list of any improvements they want to make in the school, said Harry. Tell them to go nuts with it. I have a great deal of money sitting around doing barely anything of value, and I'm willing to spend. Tell them to hand their lists of suggestions to you to be correlated. Then, you and we will make decisions. Flitwick was madly writing away as Harry was giving voice to his thoughts. The little man was almost bouncing in his seat in excitement. I'll also be dumping money into a Hogwarts improvement fund, which can be drawn upon to send staff on a fact-finding trip to other schools of magic to learn what they can of how they do things there. I'd not be surprised in the least if there were many things other schools do that can be implemented here. Some of the things I want included in those lists will be replacements for the school brooms, the telescopes, potion ingredients, cuttings and seedlings for the greenhouses, worn-out furniture, etc., he said. I also want to see the library enlarged and include more copies of many of the books that are often used. Too often, students cannot get a book because someone else already has it checked out. Just those? Asked Flitwick. Definitely not, Harry replied firmly. I expect to see a whole raft of new books included. We should also be stocking at least half a dozen of each book that appears on the students' book lists for every year. They'll be available for those students who have lost or irreparably damaged their own. Flitwick was busily writing things down. Again, Madam Pince will be pleased, he mused. Harry snorted before he continued. I also intend to revamp the pay structure, so professors are better paid. I want pay levels at the point where applicants are literally pleading to be selected. To be recognized as a professor will, again, be considered a high honor and someone worthy of great respect. That will get the staff on Harry's side, right there, thought the professor. You're not bribing the staff to make them accept all this, are you? He grinned. Definitely not, replied Harry, because, in return for that, I'll expect greater professionalism from my staff, plus, I want the 4 head of house positions to be removed from existing professors. The 4 heads of houses will have only that position. They won't be professors, but they will be entirely responsible for the students in each of their houses. I'll be expecting them to spend most of their time looking out for the best interests of their students, including being available to their students at all times of the day, if for nothing else, just being a shoulder to cry on because they're feeling homesick. The 4 heads of the houses will also be the magical guardians for the Muggle-born students in their houses unless one is organized for them in advance, so they need to be wholly focused on the well-being of the students under their care. I know that won't be popular, but professors will be professors only. Their role is to teach. The only exception to that rule will be the role of deputy head. That person, as well as being responsible to teach, will be the final arbiter of discipline of students. The head, you will be the final arbiter of discipline of staff. Professors Sprout, Babbling, Sinistra, and Vector will need to decide whether they want to give up their roles as heads of each of the 4 houses or lose their status as professors to be those heads of houses. Sorry, but I do not feel they can designate sufficient time to both jobs to do justice to either job. Harry waited until the headmaster stopped writing and looked up again. That will not be a popular decision, Lord Potter, he said. However, I can see where you're coming from. You do not want to see another Miss Lovegood situation, do you? Exactly, Professor. To name only one example, replied Harry, but I've learned the bullying can often be even worse in Slytherin and Gryffindor houses. It's just not as long-term or as many students involved. The headmaster nodded, but had a slight pinch to his cheeks as he was clearly reminiscing about Harry's second year. Headmaster, I also task you with finding, over the summer break, 4 trustworthy and empathic individuals who epitomize each of the houses to become the heads of the houses. They will not be recognized as professors, but will have the authority to give and deduct house points and issue detentions. They will also be recognized as fully fledged members of staff. As I mentioned in the staff meeting, I won't directly interfere. However, things need to change quite radically in some instances, and I've got the gold to throw at the problem, he continued. Looking over to where the sorting hat sat on its shelf next to where Fawkes's perch once stood, Harry said, As for you, Hat— Yes, Lord Potter, Slytherin, Gryffindor, it replied. The little professor appeared a little startled when Harry chose to converse directly with the ancient magical artifact. You are, without doubt, the preeminent expert on the history of the school. Why none of the recent heads have ever sought your advice is beyond my ken, said Harry. Thank you, my lord, said the hat. Those who should have been seeking my advice stopped doing so centuries ago. Well, said Harry, I'm fixing that. Turning back to Flitwick, he said, Hat will provide you, if you ask, with the real history of the school, and not the trash you've probably read and believed to be truth. Hat is a font of both great wisdom and great knowledge on the school, and how it was run in its infancy. I want this school back to that standard, with modern methods complementing rather than fighting against those issues. I want the truth taught. For example, he said, turning once more to the hat, Hat, was Salazar Slytherin a pure-blood extremist? Ha! said the hat. Sal was what you would now consider a half-blood. Godric and Helena were first-generation. What are now called Muggle-borns. Rowena was the only one born of 2 parents who were magicals, and both parents were first-generation magicals. That left Flitwick quite stunned. And why do you think people believe him to have been a pure-blood supremacist? Asked Harry. Because of the ongoing strife with witches and wizards being persecuted, Sal wanted to find and bring to the castle any child who showed accidental magic at a very early age and foster them with magical parents. In other words, he wanted to take them from their non-magical parents, by force, if necessary, to protect them from persecution and harm. Sal was not against Muggle-borns. He was against Muggle-borns being raised outside of the magical community. He wanted to ensure their protection. It was that idealism that saw him at odds with God Roan Hela. That's why he left. The fighting broke out later among his supporters and the others. Turning back to the headmaster, Harry said, See, Hat has all that knowledge, all that truth, at your disposal. He was ignored because pure-blood supremacists don't want people to learn the truth. What he knows, if shared, will turn many of the belief systems of Wizarding Britain on its head. I just hope you won't be like the last few iterations of headmasters and ignore him. Stuttering a little, shocked, Flitwick replied, I assure you, Lord Potter, I will not. It had just not occurred to me before to make use of the hat's knowledge like that. Harry smiled and said, Thank you, and I'm sure Hat is only too eager to assist. I am, said the hat. It will be nice to fall back into the role of trusted advisor once again. Smiling, Harry said, You may even want to consider him being a guest lecturer in history of magic. Oh yes, you're also going to need to hire a new history of magic professor. I'm going to banish Binns for good. We don't just need a good history professor, we need a great history professor. We need one who will replace the dearth of history taught with the abundance of history available. If the students are not taught what led to the rise of Dark Lords of the past, we'll just get more of them. An 18th century Irish statesman, Edmund Burke, said, "Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it." Flitwick nodded and wrote down a couple more points. "Now this point you can consider cast in iron," said Harry, adopting a stern countenance and staring at the new headmaster. "Under no circumstances is Albus Dumbledore allowed onto school grounds, in any capacity. Do whatever you need to do to set the wards accordingly. If he uses forks to get in, I want him automatically and immediately bounced right out again. I also understand we will probably have to allow a portrait of him to hang in here if for nothing else but historical reasons. However, that portrait is to be static only. I don't want him poisoning the thoughts of future headmasters with his greater good nonsense." Flitwick sadly smiled and said, "You really don't like the man, do you?" With a snort, Harry replied, "The depths to which I despise the man is infinite." Harry thought for a bit before he said, "It's not as if the man is evil. He's just uncaring of the individual. When he looks at a situation, he sees the forest, but not the trees, and not the wildlife that exists within that forest, especially nor the individuals. Dumbledore thought of me as a weapon he was attempting to mold into a particular form. Then he planned on aiming me at Riddle and setting me loose to deal with him. In other words, I was not even considered by him to have any say in the matter. The prophecy said I would face Riddle in a fight to the death, and Dumbledore was bent on ensuring that would happen. Everything else, including the fact I was a living, breathing human being, was just a nuisance to his plans. He had to work around to achieve his goal. Hell, it wasn't even important to him. I win the fight, just that I face him. If I lost the fight, then the prophecy was still complete. That then meant anyone could face Riddle, and sooner or later, someone would kill him. I think Dumbledore even hoped it would be him. However, if I did win the fight, then Dumbledore could step forth and say it was all according to the plan he created, that he shaped me to be Riddle's killer, and thus ensuring Dumbledore's godlike reputation and inclusion in history's pages as one of the greatest wizards ever to walk the earth. If not the greatest, it was all part of his greater good. Harry sighed as Daphne leaned in to hug him as Harry practically spat out the last few words. "And how do you know this, Lord Potter?" Flitwick quietly asked, clearly curious. "Dumbledore may be a master occlumens, but even he is not immune to the efforts of the unspeakables," replied Harry. "He didn't even know they were doing it either. While they were speaking with him about how the prophecy he'd just spent the last 15+ years of his life planning schemes around was now completed, they dosed him with potions and dragged the information out of him. And Dumbledore still will not accept that the prophecy is complete. He believes they're showing him the darkened orb is one of Riddle's tricks. He still believes his great plan is the only answer, and, as his plan has not run its course, Riddle must still be alive and will soon be back. He's also waiting for the moment when the Board of Governors and the Ministry beg him to retake the headmaster position or some other position of power, such as minister. He's even prepared what he's going to say when they do. How humble he will be while still portraying the role of a great statesman. In other words, he's bonkers. As the week progressed without classes, other than their being given assignments to complete during the summer break, Harry ran around getting business done. He and Daphne visited, via the Floo in the owner's suites, Gringotts. He created his Hogwarts Improvement Fund and keyed in Headmaster Flitwick and himself to access it. When he handed the key to the headmaster and told him there was now 1 million galleons sitting in the vault, waiting for him to use it, the little professor looked like he was going to faint. He also used the opportunity to move major funds about among his other lordships. Both Gryffindor and Slytherin were on firm financial ground, so he just instructed Bloodfang to have at them and make him money, a job the goblin dove into with much glee. The goblin's only restriction was no illegal stuff. The Gaunts did not have a vault, and their account was in arrears, so he opened up a new vault for that house, and transferred from the Potter vaults to the new Gaunt vault another 1 million galleons. Bloodfang received the same instructions for that account as with Gryffindor and Slytherin. During the meeting, Daphne handed to the very happy goblin their written instructions on what outstanding debts he was to go after, which ones he was to excuse, and which to leave alone. Before they were even out of the office, Bloodfang was madly writing away and barking out instructions in the goblin tongue to supernumeraries who were getting called into his presence. Bloodfang was so happy with Harry, he even allowed the two to leave via his own personal flu connection in the office without charge. They flew directly back to Hogwarts. When Harry told the little professor about the behavior of Bloodfang, Flitwick roared with laughter. When he'd finally settled down enough to talk, the headmaster said, "That sounds like the happiest goblin I've ever heard of." "I think it was Harry's instructions for the Gryffindor, Slytherin and Gaunt Vaults that really got him going," said Daphne with a grin. Harry said, "Go make me money, just don't get me involved in illegal stuff," and then set him loose. Flitwick roared with laughter again. Dewey also sent Harry a stack of documents that he needed Harry to sign to make a start on getting House Gaunt elevated. None of them required signing by a blood quill, so Harry was happy to sign. Dewey did inform him, though, that he'd need to go into the office during the first week of the holidays to sign some documents, as they needed signing with a blood quill. However, there weren't that many. Luna approached Harry on the Wednesday evening to let him know what she felt was bad news. "I'm sorry, Harry," she meekly said, "but Daddy needs to publish a day earlier because he thinks he's going to need the extra day of printing time. We can't push back our departure for Sweden to search for the crumple-horned Snorkax to a day later, otherwise we would have done just that." Harry gathered the girl in a big hug and said, "That's quite all right, dear Luna. I'm just happy we got as many days as we did. I kind of expected the story to break much sooner." Holding the upset girl out at arm's length, he calmly said, "Thank you for telling me. It means I can now prepare myself for what's going to happen tomorrow." As Aunt Amelia, Uncle Algy, and the others were also already aware of the story, Harry only had to let them know the issue was coming out a day sooner than anticipated. He sent off Hedwig with the letter to Aunt Amelia and used School Owls and his mirror for the rest. Harry wasn't concerned they'd be upset with the news, as each was already prepared for when the story broke. The next morning, the entire group gathered and headed down for breakfast early and sat at the Gryffindor table. They all wanted to ensure they'd be finished eating before the male owls arrived. As he'd kept an eye on the head table, as soon as Harry saw Professor Flitwick arrive, he hurried over and whispered, "Q-Day." That was their code for when Harry expected the Quibbler to come out. The professor looked back and firmly nodded his head. Reaching into the pocket of his robes, he withdrew a set of small clips of parchment and made sure each piece was handed to an already attending professor or placed on their plate before their chair for when they would arrive. As Harry headed back to his seat, everything was now in place. After they'd finished breaking their fast, Harry sat back with a cup of tea in his hand and waited. Though it felt like hours, it was only about 15 minutes later when the male owls flocked in through the owl windows in the peak of the ceiling. Harry quickly handed his strips of bacon set aside for Hedwig to the snowy owl as he released her of her package. He quickly opened the paper and immediately found the article. Unbelievably to him, it was on the front page, though it was below the fold. He quickly scanned it into his memory and handed the paper to Daphne. And while scanning the house tables, he read it in his mind's eye. He quickly determined it was Luna's best work. It contained everything about what had happened, and it even included quotes from Madame Bones and Unspeakable Croaker. Croaker never spoke to the media, so it was a real scoop for the girl. Both Aunt Amelia and Uncle Algy confirmed Riddle had been resurrected on the night and that Harry had killed him again, this time in a one-on-one duel. They even managed to include a small wizarding photo of Harry striking Riddle with the killing blow of a bludgeoning hex to the chest. There was nothing about him using the cutting charm to decapitate the body. Uncle Algy also confirmed that they knew how Riddle had managed to come back, and that, this time, he was never going to be coming back. The threat of Voldemort was over, for good. A wizarding photograph also showed an Unspeakable, in full unspeakable robes, with the cowl up distorting his face, while holding up a glass container with Riddle's head within. When he'd finished reading the article, Harry looked at Luna and said, "Girl, I am most impressed. Outstanding work." Luna gave a sheepish little smile and blushed. He'd never been able to make her blush before, no matter how ribald he spoke around her. Damn, the girl even managed to make him blush by out-ribalding him in return. As others in their group finished reading the article, they each congratulated her. Harry thought he even caught tears of happiness in the girl's eyes. Catching her eye again, Harry said to her, "Dear Luna, irrespective of the sums agreed to in our little contract, you have my permission to sell that article to other media organizations and get whatever you can for it. Use the money to fund your excursions or use it to fund your education. It's up to you." Luna dropped her eyes and nodded her head, but Harry could tell she was right pleased. Harry watched as other students who received the Quibbler read the article. Some looked over at him in awe, others looked over at him in shock, but most didn't know what to make of the whole thing. Harry just drew in his magic enough to make his eyes glow just a little, and held it as he smirked back at all of them. The first major point occurred when one of the Slytherin students screeched, "What?" and stood up holding the paper in his hands. "He can't be!" the boy screamed angrily, staring straight at Harry with both fear and loathing. "It's not true." That was just what Harry needed to happen. He'd prepared for this. Slowly standing up, still oozing a little magic, Harry slowly walked from the Gryffindor table to stand just in front of the head table. He kept an eye on the Slytherin table, and the angry student in particular. The whole way, everyone was silent. No one made a sound. Once in position, he shot his wand into his hand and slowly raised it into the oath position. I, Harry James Potter, swear on my magic and my life that I did face in one-on-one magical combat, in a duel to the death, the wizard Tom Marvolo Riddle, who also went by the sobriquets Dark Lord and Lord Voldemort, that I did kill him in that battle, and that all other information provided concerning that battle in today's issue of the Quibbler is true and correct in every instance. So say I. So mote it be. Harry flashed as the magic recognized the oath. Stretching his arm to point his wand out towards the doors to the entrance hall, he cast Expecto Patronum. Prongs leapt forth in all his glory. He appeared in form, an almost solid, misty silver. Harry held him there and pumped more magic into him as he then took on an almost golden tinge. While continuing to hold the Patronus, Harry smirked and quietly but clearly enough said, "Enough said." He then released the form to fade away. Looking across the 4 house tables, Harry said, "Everything I'm prepared to share of what happened on that night is in that article of the Quibbler. If you do not receive a copy of the Quibbler, Miss Luna Lovegood, sitting over there at the Gryffindor tables, will organize for you to receive a subscription for it." Luna waved to everyone with a happy grin. Harry smirked back and continued, "For the first time in my life, and I'm sad to say, probably not for the last time, I killed someone a week ago, tonight, that he was considered the most evil bastard around. And he literally was a bastard, by the way, was beside the point. It is not easy, nor should it be, to take the life of another person. It does not matter if it is in self-defense, as it was with me. I knew it was kill or be killed. It still gutted me to do it. I also know there are going to be those out there in the wizarding world who are going to think to themselves, if I face off against him and beat him, I'll make a name for myself. If that's you, forget it now. The healers with the unspeakables have determined I have 3 things going for me that only a very rare few possess of any. That I have all 3 they've never seen before. One is, I have preternaturally fast reflexes. You all know how good I am as Seeker in Quidditch. I swear to you now, as Seeker, I'm barely even trying, even riding a firebolt. I think the broom is too sluggish for what I want it to do. The second is, I have an incredibly high pain tolerance. Receiving injuries that would otherwise keep normal witches and wizards off their feet will barely slow me down. Riddle, Voldemort, cast the Cruciatus curse on me twice before I dueled him. I still kicked his ass. And the third is, Harry arced his power level right up to his current maximum and was leaking magic at a phenomenal rate. I'm bloody powerful. He let his magic ease back down to where his eyes were only slightly glowing. They've not been able to properly gauge just how powerful yet, because he wouldn't let them. But he wasn't telling these kids that. Please, I beg you, don't make me kill you, he continued in the quiet and firm voice he'd been using. However, if you make me come after you by going after me or mine, I will not hesitate to do so. Professor Dumbledore was worried I was going, or am, dark. I am not. However, neither am I light. I am grey. That means, in real combat, I will not fight by any stupid rules. That also means I would make a poor aura. Instead, I will use any and all means available to me to put you down fast and hard. If I have to kill you to do it, so be it. I will not be casting stunners. He then gave a small bow and said, "Thank you for listening," and walked back to the Gryffindor table and his friends. He didn't know who started it, but as he walked back to his friends, the applause began. It got louder as he rounded the end of the table and walked down to sit beside his love, his betrothed. It continued on for quite a while after he finally took his seat and earned a kiss from Daphne before Professor Flitwick, who had been clapping just as wildly as the others only a few seconds earlier, fired off a couple of bangs to regain quiet. When the hall finally quieted down again, he stood and said, "Lord Potter has done us a great service. He has rid us of a great evil. And like you, I am very much relieved the threat of the one who called himself Lord Voldemort is gone, this time for good. However, Lord Potter, or, as he prefers, just call me Harry, has asked you not bother him and his friends by asking questions about what happened last Thursday, or anything about how he knows Voldemort riddle has gone for good. Much of it has been declared a national secret by the Unspeakables. What you are allowed to know is all contained in that article in the Quibbler. And now that you have broken your fasts, I'll allow you to remain for a little while longer before I insist you head off to your last Thursday morning classes for the year." He smiled before saying, "I believe your professors have yet more homework assignments for you to collect. That is all." He then sat down again, and people, students and staff alike, were happily discussing the phenomenal news they'd just learned of that morning. Harry was wondering how they were going to accept things when they found out he was also both Lord Gryffindor and Lord Slytherin. Surprising Harry, very few people actually did approach him to see if they could discover more information. However, he quickly realized they knew he wouldn't tell them. They just wanted a chance to be near him and to talk to him. Some just wanted to give their thanks. Some just wanted to shake the hand that held the wand that killed Voldemort. And some wanted a photograph of him. At lunchtime, Harry sought out young Colin Creevey. Taking the boy, whose hero worship of him had just jumped up a couple more notches, aside, Harry asked, "Colin, how would you like to make a little bit of money doing what you love to do?" Looking back in awe, Colin only nodded his head in response. Harry smiled and asked, "You still have your camera, right? Plenty of film?" Again with the nod. "Excellent," said Harry. "After class this afternoon, I'm going to go get changed into some nice robes, tidy myself up a bit, and make myself available to you for you to take a few wizarding photographs. In return, I'll give you some galleons, so you can buy heaps of photographic paper and some nice new equipment, and I want you to run off a heap of the best photographs you take. When people then ask me for a photograph of me, I'll send them to you, all right?" Again with the nod, Harry chuckled and said, "All right, Colin, I suspect I'll be out of the last class pretty early, seeing as I'm only there to collect details of my homework assignment, so I'll meet you in Great Hall. Fair enough?" And yet again with the nod. "Do you have any questions of me, Colin?" asked a grinning Harry. This time he received a headshake. Harry outright laughed and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're all right, Colin." Then he left to rejoin his friends at the Ravenclaw table. "I think you broke Creevey the Older," said Neville, indicating with his chin and a wide grin. Harry looked back and, sure enough, Colin appeared to be in a daze, sitting at the Gryffindor table. "What did you say to him?" asked Blaise, with his own grin. "I just made him feel as if all his Christmases had come at once," replied Harry with a grin of his own. "I asked him if he could take a wizarding photograph or two of me this afternoon. As soon as we get released from our last class, Ancient Runes, I'm going to whiz off and get changed into some fancy robes and meet him back here in the Great Hall. I'll leave it up to him where those photographs are taken. He's a bloody good photographer and shows real talent." "In that case," said Daphne, "you can wait for me. I want some photographs of both of us. Together, Harry leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. "Anything for you, my love. Just please don't take too long getting ready. We need to be done in time to go and get changed back for the leaving feast." Daphne harumphed, as if to say, how dare Harry accuse her of taking too long to get dressed. Their double ancient runes class lasted only long enough for them to be congratulated by Professor Babbling for an excellent year, and for her to let them know what their assignments would be before they were released. Harry made his way back to the Ravenclaw Tower and soon changed. However, he knew he could take his time a little, because Daphne would take a while to get ready, no matter what she said. He was about to don one of his formal robes with the Potter crest when he stopped and had a thought. "Petey," he called. With a slight pop, Petey appeared next to him. "Yes, Master Harry?" asked his head elf. Kneeling down, Harry indicated the Potter crest on his robe. "How long would it take you to have the Gryffindor and Slytherin crests appear directly under the Potter crest and side by side right here and here?" he said, indicating the two places. "The Hogwarts' elves can do that in a few moments, Master Harry," said Petey. "That's what I thought," said Harry, as he stood up and tossed the robe onto his bed. "Can you please take that robe, get it done, and bring it straight back here for me, Petey?" "Yes, Master Harry." Petey and the robe immediately vanished. But as he promised, he was back a few moments later. The robe was folded neatly on the bed. Harry reached over and picked it up. Then, holding it by the collar, he allowed it to drop out to full length. He then held the material open so he could see the handiwork of the elves. It was perfect. Harry saw that the two new crests were also a little smaller than the Potter crest, and evenly spaced from the exact center line below his personal crest. Turning to Petey, he said, "Tell the elves they did a perfect job, Petey, and thank them for me, will you? And thank you too." "Yes, Master Harry. Thank you, Master Harry," and Petey popped away. Harry quickly donned the robe and took a look at himself in his full-length mirror. A quick shaving charm upon himself and localized invisibility charm on the two new crests until he was ready to display them, and he was ready to go. He'd cast the other photography charms upon himself when young Colin was ready. Hesitating for just a moment, he went to his personal bookshelf and pulled out the book on photography charms he'd bought back in first year. He'd give that to Colin as a personal thank you. His ever-present money pouch was affixed to his belt, ready to hand some galleons over to the boy. Harry calmly sat at the Ravenclaw table, waiting for both Daphne and Colin to show up. A few of the more timid students kept just staring at him and turning away with a blush when he looked in their direction. Colin came rushing in and looking around about 20 minutes later. He almost appeared to be in a panic. When he saw Harry, he visibly sagged in relief and came hurrying over. Harry grinned at the boy and told him to take a seat, indicating the bench opposite. "All right," said Harry after the boy was somewhat settled. "We're going to have to wait for Lady Daphne. When she learned I wanted some photos taken, she was insistent she join me." "Is that all right with you?" "Yeah," Colin replied, with his head almost frantically bobbing. "Sometimes it's easier to work with and pose couples than individuals." "Thank you," said Harry. He then slid the photography cantrips and charms book to the younger boy and said, "You'll find these most interesting. If you haven't already purchased similar books for yourself, or even that particular one, there's plenty of charms and cantrips within that can be used to give your models more zazz." Popping his wand out, Harry said, for example, and cast upon himself his favorite cantrip to make his hair sit the way he liked, and his eyes sparkle. "Oh, wow," said Colin. "That's how you did it." Harry nodded and said, "That book's full of very similar charms for both men and women, and even children." He then reached into his money pouch and withdrew about 20 galleons. He placed them in 2 piles on the table between them and said, "There's 20. If you need more, owl me." "Oh no! Wow! That's heaps," replied the boy, his eyes almost seeming to pop out of his head, staring at the 2 piles. "Relax, Colin," chuckled Harry. "Just put those in your pocket or money pouch or whatever." The boy quickly complied and also pulled his camera out of his bag. "I've got plenty of film too," he said. "But the gold will really help to buy more." "Help? I don't want you to be out of pocket doing this, Colin," said Harry. "I want you to make a profit. Don't hesitate to ask for more if you need it." "Okay, Harry," said the younger boy. Colin was telling Harry about some of the extra equipment he wanted to buy during the break, and Harry was telling him to let him know what he wanted. Harry intended to help the boy out as much as he could when Daphne walked in. Catching sight of her out of the corner of his eye and looking up, Harry said, "She's here." Both boys rose as Daphne came over. "All right," she said. "I told you I wouldn't be long." Harry smiled and said, "Of course not," and kissed her cheek. Turning to the other boy, he said, "Well, Colin, where would you like us to go?" Glancing out one of the windows, he looked back and said, "While we have the light, I'd like to take a few shots outside, if you don't mind." "That sounds lovely," said Daphne. Colin took them away from the castle a bit and took some shots with the castle in the background, then some down near the lake. Some were taken with the main doors of the castle in the near background. There were photographs with Harry on his own, Daphne on her own, and both together. Daphne even took one of Harry and Colin with their arms manly about each other's shoulders. Inside, Colin took photographs with many recognizable features in the background. A few from the entrance hall with the open doors of the Great Hall behind, a couple in the vacant potions lab, much to Professor Dinwiddie's displeasure, quite a few in the library. Daphne wanted one in front of the open door to the Slytherin common room, and one with Harry in front of the Ravenclaw eagle. Swearing Colin to secrecy, Harry had a photo taken in front of the open door to the Gryffindor suite, with both his other two crests showing. He had that one taken when Daphne recognized the time and scarpered down to Slytherin dorms to change. Colin considered himself already ready, so didn't have to go. Harry was going just as he was dressed. He had a reason for that. Harry waited for Daphne at the foot of the stairs leading down to the dungeons from the entrance hall. Again, he had the crests for houses Gryffindor and Slytherin hidden with an invisibility charm. One of the last to arrive, he escorted both Daphne and Tracy to the Slytherin table, smirked at both, and walked up and around the back of the head table, taking seat at Headmaster Flitwick's left hand. From his higher-than-usual chair, Headmaster Flitwick turned and grinned at him. Harry grinned back. All the students were looking at him in shock and whispering with their table mates. Once it appeared noise was going to get a bit rowdy, Flitwick stood on his seat and addressed the student body. Deputy Headmistress Sprout tapped a little gong to gain quiet for the headmaster to speak. "Yes," called the headmaster once he had relative silence. "Lord Potter, rather than Mr. Potter, has joined us at the head table tonight in a place of honor. He will also be formally addressing you all at the completion of the feast." Hesitating a moment, just for the gravitas of the situation, he continued. "Another year has now passed us by. Tomorrow morning, you head for your homes to enjoy a summer break. Sadly, due to the Triwizard Tournament, it is not as long a break as you have come to expect." That received a few angry mutters from some students. With a calming gesture, he continued, "Our seventh years, however, need not concern themselves with the summer break. They leave us, in the most part, for good. Congratulations to our graduating seventh years." This time there were quite a few cheers from the other end of the hall. "For our returning students, you have almost 9 weeks to clear your minds, refresh your bodies, and lift your hearts before we return for the 1995-96 school year. Plenty of time to accomplish that." Without much further ado, he said as he glanced over at Ron Weasley, who appeared to be salivating in anticipation, and because it appears some are so hungry they're about to gnaw their own limbs off, that earned him a few chuckles, especially those sitting around the aforementioned boy. "Let us feast." And the tables filled with the food for the feast. Harry spent the evening talking with Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinistra, who sat to his own left. They spoke about school matters, and Harry even inquired about their holiday plans. He also kept glancing up and around the hall, especially towards Daphne. He could see Daphne and Tracy at Slytherin, Luna at Ravenclaw, Susan and Hannah at Hufflepuff, and Neville and Hermione at Gryffindor were all being pumped for information. When it appeared Luna was about to wilt under the almost barrage of questions coming her way, Harry allowed his magic to flow out of his eyes and glared at those who appeared to be badgering the girl. It took only a couple of them to look to him, see his expression and visibly flinch away. Word passed between the offenders very quickly, and the pressure on the girl eased right off. She looked back to him with a smile of gratitude. As the feast wound to a close, and the last dishes were whisked away, Headmaster Flitwick moved around to the front of the head table and stood there on a small podium he conjured to address the students. "Now that our bellies are full to bursting with that marvelous feast," he said, "I did promise you a final address from Lord Potter before you head off for your last night of the school year sleeping in your dorms." As Harry walked around the head table to join the little headmaster, Flitwick said, "I suggest you pay very close attention to what Lord Potter is about to impart upon you. This information is both astounding and world-changing. For us, here at Hogwarts." Harry moved up to stand alongside the headmaster and shook the half-goblin's hand. As Flitwick moved away, Harry cleared his throat and cast an almost furtive glance and grin at Daphne. She grinned back. Excited. "Staff and students," he began. "Nice and simple. As Headmaster Flitwick alluded, I have yet more news to give you. Long has it been unknown who the rightful heirs of the founders are. Riddle claimed direct descendants from Slytherin. Others have claimed descendants from Slytherin. And/or the other three. None have actually successfully claimed right to any of the titles." Let the Slytherins think hard on that for the moment, he thought. Riddle didn't actually go in and formally claim his heritage. For example, pretty much everyone who descends from an ancient house has, at some point in their ancestry, descended from at least one of the founders, but none have been declared the rightful heir. That ends tonight. He waited for the sudden upswing in background chatter to die away, again before continuing. He popped his wand out and raised it to the oath position. "I, Harry James Potter, hereby let it be known that I am the rightful heir to the noble and ancient house of Gryffindor, and before chatter could pick up again, it immediately died down again. "Hereby let it be known that I am the rightful heir to the noble and ancient house of Slytherin. So say I, so mote it be." As the flash passed through him, he waved his wand at the crests on his dress robes and allowed the invisibility charm to fade away. He then stood there with the 3 house crests proudly displayed upon his breast. One of the male older years, sitting at the Slytherin table, suddenly stood up, enraged. Harry caught the movement out of the side of his eye, half expecting some trouble. As he turned to look at the boy raised his wand and cried, "Avada Kedavra!" With his own wand still drawn, Harry conjured a large marble slab between him and the boy, which blocked the curse and sent chunks of marble soaring. As the curse hit, Harry dropped his left foot back to adopt his preferred dueling stance and immediately cast Langlock back and followed it up with Expelliarmus. With his wand being ripped out of his hand and his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, the boy, Marcus Flint, was defenseless. But that didn't stop him being hit with a few various charms and curses coming from Harry, determined later, by reviewing his memory of the event, no less than 8 different casters, one of which was a fellow Slytherin. Flint was flung against the wall behind him and slid to the ground, clearly wounded and unconscious. He was already in that state before most of the student body could even fully react. "Silence," Harry bellowed. As soon as the students begun to settle down, he called, "Susan, please be so kind as to patronize Madam Bones and ask for her attendance. An unforgivable has been cast." Madam Pomfrey was already moving forward to attend the wounded. "Madam Pomfrey, please see to the soon-to-be resident of Azkaban for his injuries. However, do not revive him at this time." Turning back to the students, he said, "Where is his wand?" One of the female older year Hufflepuffs raised it in her hand and said, "Here, toss it up here, please," he said. "It's evidence of the crime." The girl flung it forward like she was throwing a stick for a dog. It clattered onto the dates near Harry's feet. "Treat it with the respect it deserves," he said. Before bending over and picking it up, he walked back and placed it on the head table. He then vanished the remains of the marble block. Moving back to where he was standing, he asked in a clear voice, "Now, before we continue, is there anyone else who wants to commit suicide?" No one responded. To settle them down a bit, he said, "Now that Mr. Flint has managed to get us all wide awake, and while we await the head of the DMLE, perhaps Professor Duncan may care to let us know of what he knows of what just happened." Harry turned to grin at the professor. With a bit of a forced smile, the retired Auror said, "Thank you, Lord Potter. Or is it Lord Gryffindor?" "At the moment, it's Lord Potter Slytherin Gryffindor, but Lord Potter will do in the shortened form." or Mr. Potter, as I'm still a student, and we can consider this a class in the field. Lord Potter, then, smiled the Dada professor. Looking across the students, he said, Mr. Flint, as you saw, cast an unforgivable at Lord Potter. Lord Potter could have dodged it, which uses no magical energy to accomplish, or blocked it with a suitably solid object, which he did. He turned to Harry and asked, "And why did you choose to shield instead of dodge?" "I was aware there were people, staff behind me, sitting at table," he replied. "While I could easily have dodged, given my reflexes, the same could not be said for the staff at table. Therefore, my best choice to save life was to shield." With a smile, the professor turned back to the students and said, "What Lord Potter demonstrated and talked about is what is known as situational awareness. He wasn't just aware of what and who was before him, but what and who was behind him, and reacted accordingly. When Mr. Flint stood and cast the killing curse, he was very foolish in choosing a curse that will automatically see him, as Lord Potter alluded, taking up residence in Azkaban. Secondly, he was also in a position where he could not easily dodge. He had the table before him, the bench behind his knees, and a student to either side. He was trapped. Turning back to Harry, he asked, "Could you tell us what spells you cast immediately after conjuring that impressive slab of marble?" "My first cast was a simple tongue-locking jinx. My second was the disarming charm," he replied. The professor smiled and asked, "And why did you choose those two in particular?" "Multiple reasons," replied Harry. "One, with Mr. Flint having innocence very close by, I was ill-motivated to cast more harmful curses. Both, if I'd missed my target and struck another student, would not have caused lasting harm to an innocent. Two, I needed to retaliate fast. The tongue-locking jinx has only 2 syllables for the incantation, and the wand movement is a simple point at the target. It is one of the quickest casts you can make. By using the tongue-locking jinx, unless Mr. Flint is able to cast silently, I've removed from him the ability to retaliate or cast a shield. 3. If Mr. Flint is able to cast silently, that's where the second cast comes in. The disarming charm has 5 syllables in the incantation. However, the wand movement is a simple point and flick away. The wand movement also flows seamlessly from the last and only wand movement of the tongue-locking jinx. I believe taking the time to utter the 5 syllables would be faster than his ability to think to switch from casting audibly to casting silently. If others had not cast before I was able to cast a third, and therefore broke off my retaliation, my third would have been an overpowered stunner, and my fourth would have been a binding curse in Carcerus." The professor drew his wand and slowly went through the wand movements for the students to see. Langlock, Expelliarmus, Stupefy, Incarcerus. Each movement easily flows into the next. A very quick and effective spell chain, Lord Potter. Once more, I am impressed.
I've not seen it before.
So, do you mind if I pass it on to my friends in the Aurors? Harry smiled and gave a very slight bow. I'd be honored. Before they could continue with the impromptu lesson, Aunt Amelia came storming in through the doors, flanked by a pair of Aurors. "Where's the culprit?" she demanded. Professor Duncan indicated behind the Slytherin table and said, "The culprit was young Mr. Flint, from his seat at the Slytherin table. Madame Pomfrey is currently working on him." Turning to indicate the head table, he said, "His wand is up here. A prior incantation charm will determine the killing curse was the last cast made with it." Aunt Amelia indicated to her 2 Aurors to move to Mr. Flint, while she came forward and bagged the wand. "Who did he cast it at?" she asked. "That would be me, Madam Bones," Harry quietly replied. She stared hard at him for a long moment before she said in a clear voice, "Foolish boy, how could he have thought he had a chance of taking down the one who took down Voldemort?" "That's not for me to say, madam," Harry replied with a small smirk and a bow. Shaking her head a little, she looked at the students and asked, "Did anyone here see Mr. Flint cast the killing curse?" Over 100 hands were raised. Even some of the staff raised their hands. Looking around, she snorted and said, "All right, those who retaliated in defense of Lord Potter, you're to stay behind to be interviewed. The rest are free to go." "There is just one more announcement to make, Madam Bones," said Harry. "Then we can release these weary students to their beds." "Then, by all means, have at it," she said, before she and Professor Duncan stepped away. Harry turned back to the students and said, "There's one more important point I wish to impress upon you all, lest you leave here ill-informed." The students quietened down again. "While I am both Lord Slytherin and Lord Gryffindor, and as such am the owner of this school and castle," that earned a few shocked but quiet remarks from the students among themselves, of those who hadn't already understood the ramifications. "You will not be taking an active part in the academic running of either. In here, I consider myself a student, and will remain so at least until June of 1998, when I should be graduating. Headmaster Flitwick and I will at times discuss matters pertaining to the financial situation of the school. This is to be expected. I shall also be departing from my current living arrangements of living within the Ravenclaw dorms and will be residing in one of the owner's suites. I will, however, remain a Ravenclaw student, though I'm the Gryffindor and Slytherin lord. It's confusing, I know. Though I am recognized as owner, when we return next year to continue our studies, you are not to approach me because you're unhappy with a member of staff. You already have procedures you must follow to receive relief. Those who do otherwise will find themselves reported to their head of house for the infraction. Thank you for your attention. I now hand you back to our headmaster." Harry then moved away to give everyone a clear view. "With the exception of those required to remain for their interviews with the Auras," said Flitwick. "The rest of you may now head for your beds. It will be a busy and exciting day tomorrow. Now, off you go." Harry quickly dashed over to see Daphne. "Are you all right, love?" he asked. "Yes, I'm fine," she smiled. "I'm not surprised to see Flint doing something so stupid, though. He's always acted before thought. Well, as you can expect, I have to remain behind to talk to Aunt Amelia and her Auras," he sighed. "So long as you're safe, I'm happy. I'll see you in the morning for breakfast." She gave him a quick kiss on the lips and a loving pat on the cheek before she, a smirking Tracy and Blaze, headed for the Slytherin dorms. When he turned about, he saw the others of their group standing there grinning at him. "Did one or all of you manage to tag Flint during that very quick melee?" he asked. "I did," Susan said with a grin. "I hit him with a stunner." "Well done," grinned Harry before he turned serious again and asked, "How did I do up there?" "Brilliant," said Neville. "You were very dashing and eloquent, Harry," said Hermione. "The impromptu lesson was a good idea," said Hannah. "It helped to take people's minds off what had just happened." "You knew it would, didn't you?" asked Luna. "Yes," he replied with a shrug and a grin. Turning serious, again he looked at the younger Claw and said, "I'd have preferred the Quibbler have the story of my taking the lordships of Gryffindor and Slytherin. But you cannot wait for Daddy and I to return to Britain to produce another issue," said Luna, finishing his thought. "No," replied Harry. "I understand," she simply said. "So does Daddy. He's going to miss our little arrangement, but he understands." "I'm still going to give the Quibbler exclusives, Luna," he replied. "However, as owner of the Daily Prophet organization, I need to send stories their way too." Luna just nodded back with a dreamy smile. "Of course you do." Turning back to the group as a whole, he said, "Well, you folks, except Susan, need to head to bed. And we need to talk with Aunt Amelia, see each other in the morning?" "Of course," said Hermione. The others headed off while Harry and Susan went in search of Aunt Amelia to give their statements before heading to bed themselves. For their final breakfast of the school year, the group all sat at the Hufflepuff table. As per the norm, everyone was out of school robes for the trip back to London. Harry spent quite a bit of time answering questions from other students about his 2 new lordships to add to the ones about the defeat of old Mouldy Shorts. Eventually, though, they were on their way to the train. They were also among the first students to make the journey from the castle to Hogsmeade station, as Harry wanted to get away from all the questions. As they arrived on the platform and collected their trunks, there was a bit of a bottleneck of students heading for the various carriages. When they struggled their way through the pack, Harry and the others saw why there was a delay. Sitting at the rear of the train was a shiny new carriage, but this one had the house crests of the 4 founders adorning the side panel rather than the single crest of Hogwarts. On both platform side doors was the word "Private." I think this is ours, said Harry, wondering aloud. He walked over to the door and reached up to place his right hand on the door handle. I wouldn't do that if I was you, said a Hufflepuff. It gave me one hell of a jolt when I tried. That's because you're not the rightful heir of one of the founders, smiled Harry, looking back. He reached up and grasped the handle. Twisting it, he felt a bloodlock release and pushed the door open. Yep, I was right, he said. Blaise hopped in while Harry and Neville loaded the trunks into the carriage. Blaise pulled them through, out of the way. With the last ones in, Harry indicated to Neville to precede him in before he followed and closed the door behind him. Someone behind him then tried to open the door again and yelped in pain as they shook their hand free before tucking it under their armpit. Harry looked out the window and saw it was one of the older Slytherins. His friends were laughing at him as he scowled back, shaking his head and wondering how someone from the House of the Cunning and Guile could do something so stupid. Harry turned away and entered the carriage proper. What he saw near took his breath away. The entire carriage was decked out like a part parlor car, part dining car, part office, and all opulence. With the exception of 2 water closets cum change rooms and a small kitchen area cum bar, the entire carriage was open plan. Storage of trunks was in a special rack set near the door through which they entered. This is amazing, he said. I know, right? Said Daphne, coming forward, with a big grin. And it's yours. Ours, said Harry right back. Walking slowly along, he looked in all the spaces and to the end of the carriage. Opening the door there, he stepped out onto a small balcony that was about 4 feet wide and covered the width of the carriage. 2 outdoor wooden seats were there, bolted and folded up to the back wall. He wondered why he didn't see it when they approached the train. Walking back inside, he opened the door at that end that led back onto the platform and hopped out. Looking around, he saw that the rear open platform was actually disillusioned. Ah, he thought, it makes sense, I suppose. As he opened the door to re-enter the carriage, he heard someone call him. Hey, Potter, the voice called. Harry turned around to see who was calling him. It was the twins. Hey, gents, he said, come on in, and held the door open for them. Nah, said one. We're meeting someone, said the other. We'll try to come and see you once we're on our way. That'd be great, said Harry. As he was talking, one of 6th-year Slytherin prefects walked up and interrupted. Hey, Potter, he sneered, standing up proudly. I think this is our car. His friends looked on with glee. You thought wrong, said Harry. This is the private car of the heirs of the founders. That means me. Harry then slammed the door in the idiot's face and watched as he became angry and grasped the door handle. Like the Slytherin before him, he snatched his hand back in shock as the handle did whatever it did. Chuckling, he moved back to the others, who had decided to take seat in a group in the parlor area. What's so funny? Asked Tracy.
Oh, I've just been watching some idiot pureblood supremacists trying to get in, he chuckled. Somehow they seem to think this carriage is for them. Daphne rolled her eyes as Tracy giggled. For how long do you think they'll keep trying? Probably for the entire trip, and for quite a few trips to come, replied Harry. I saw the twins out there. I've invited them to join us, but they're off to see their friends. They'll be by once we're underway. How will they get in? Asked Luna. Surprised at the obviousness of the question, Harry hadn't thought of an answer. Heh, he said. No idea. Thinking for a few moments, he said, hang on, and moved to the front of the carriage. There was the door leading back up the train. He opened it and opened the door into the next carriage, across the hitch. He was back in the normal train carriages. Okay, he thought. Turning back to the founder's carriage, he placed his hand on the door handle and felt the jolt of being recognized. Yep, he thought, that'll be a problem. Realizing he already had the answer, he reached into his robes and drew out his prepared note he would have put on their compartment door. Try knocking, the atom. He affixed it to the door in the middle of the glass directly below the word private with a sticking charm, before stepping back to have a look at it. That'll do, he thought, before closing the door. Walking back to the others and taking seat on the love seat next to Daphne, he said, There, done. What did you do? Asked Hannah.
I put our try-knocking sign on the door between carriages, said Harry. Someone will just have to go and see who it is if we hear a knock. Turning to look at Daphne, who had changed her position on the seat to lean on his shoulder, he said, "Sorry, love, I'm going to see if we have elves here." Though she pouted, Daphne pulled away from him to allow him to rise again. He walked over to the bar and sat on one of the stools. "Elf?" he asked. With a pop, Frosty appeared. "My lord." "Oh, hello, Frosty," said Harry. "I thought there might be a different elf for the carriage." "Would you like a different elf for the carriage?" asked the little elf, clearly unhappy to ask. "I'm happy to have you serve us, Frosty," smiled Harry. "I just didn't want to take you away from your modernization and refit work on the Gryffindor and Slytherin suites." "I am happy to serve, my lord, in whatever capacity you need," replied the elf. "In that case, how about some drinks for my friends and me?" said Harry. "Of course, my lord," bowed the elf. Harry went back to sit with Daphne just as he felt the train begin to move. They were on their way back to London. About an hour into their trip, they received their first knock, after they first heard a yelp. Laughing among themselves, Harry was about to get up and go take a look when Blaise said, "You wait there, oh great and wonderful Lord Slytherin. Allow this lowly peasant to see what they want." Harry, of course, the great and powerful lord he is, blew him a raspberry. Grinning back, Blaise walked to the door and opened it. Someone tried to step in, and he blocked them from doing so. "Blaise?" called Harry, wondering what was going on. "It's a prefect, my lord," he replied, calling back. "They seem insistent they be allowed in." Harry sighed and muttered to Daphne, "I think I'd better go and resolve this issue to ensure it doesn't happen again." She nodded and pulled back. "Go forth, my hero, and deal with the scoundrel." Harry just snorted as the others laughed or giggled. Walking over to the door, he said to Blaise, "All right, I've got this. Thanks, Blaise." As Blaise stepped out of his way, Harry stepped forward to block the door. He was faced with yet another angry Slytherin. This one, a girl and prefect. There was a second one standing behind her, also with an angry expression. "All right," he sighed. "Why don't you try and tell me what this is about, hmm?" She thrust her chest out at him, turning just slightly, and angrily asked, "Do you know what this is?" Harry looked down for a couple of moments before looking back up again to meet her eyes. "A nice pair of boobs?" he asked, trying to act innocent. It was ruined by Blaise, standing just apart from him, snorting and choking while trying not to laugh. "Not my boobs," she barked at him, making the girls behind Harry squeal with laughter. "What? You mean they're fake?" he gasped. "Can I squeeze them and see for myself?" "No," the girl practically screamed at him, going red with anger. His friends were practically howling with laughter behind him, while the girl behind her went red with embarrassment and had to look away. Ignoring the laughter, she raised her hand and pointed at a prefect badge on the lapel of her robes and said, "I meant this." "I believe it's called a finger," Harry blandly replied. Blaise hurried away, half choking on suppressed laughter. "This is a prefect badge," she snarked. "Oh, that," said Harry. "It's very pretty. Now, what does that have to do with you wanting to come into my private carriage?" "It is the job of a prefect to inspect the express. We have rounds and duties to follow," she said quite snootily, calming down again. "Really?" asked Harry. "Tell me, what does the engineer look like?" "Pardon?" she spluttered, again thrown off her stride. "I asked you what the engineer looks like," Harry repeated. "If it's your job to inspect the express, then surely you've been up to the engine compartment, right?" Spluttery again, she said, No. I mean, it's our job to inspect the compartments to ensure the students are all safe." "Good for you," said Harry, suddenly beaming. "Then go do so. There are no compartments in this private owner's carriage. Good day," and slammed the door shut in her face. He spun around and winked at his friends and waited. Sure enough, there was a bare hesitation before there was a banging on the door. Iphile smirking at his friends, he changed his expression to one of polite inquiry and spun back to the door. Opening it and stepping back in to block the doorway, he asked, "Yes?" The same girl and her friend were still there. "As a prefect, I demand you let me in." "I'm not a prefect," said Harry, looking confused. "I'm the owner. Weren't you at the leaving feast where I explained all this? No, I'm a prefect, she said in angered exasperation, and I demand you let me in. Having now had enough fun with the idiot, Harry said, I'm the owner, and I demand you go away. And as the owner, I'm overriding your head of house's instructions and altering your duties. As of right now, like the engine, the owner's carriage is not part of the train the prefects need to inspect. Good day to you, Miss I am a prefect. Furious again, she hissed, We'll see about this, and she spun about and stormed away, her friend trailing after her. Just as Harry was about to close the door, the Weasley twins hurried around the corner, both laughing. Hi, gents, said Harry. Come on in, and stepped back, holding the door open for them. The twins came in laughing. We think little Miss Henrietta Vicey is most wroth with you, Harry. Is that who that was? Asked Harry. I thought she was I. Emma Prefect, though, she never actually introduced herself. I was just going to ask her what the I stood for. But I thought it might have been one of those horrid names like Ianthea, and she'd decided to use her middle name instead. I was even going to introduce myself as H. James Potter and see if we could have found some common ground. Because, I tell ya, I wouldn't mind getting my hands on those fake boobs of hers and finding out whether they were spongy or firm or have much play in them, or even if it was just bra stuffing. Harry James Potter, Daphne barked at him with a squeal, interrupting his train of thought. Looking around, Harry could see Blaise and the twins were rolling around on the floor, literally howling with laughter. Neville was getting repeatedly smacked by a bright red Hannah while laughing his heart out, and the other girls, including Daphne and, especially, Luna, were bright red with embarrassment. What? He asked, really playing up the innocent game. You think they might not be fake after all? That? She lied to me? With a huff, he said. Well, that's just rude. You will not talk about another girl's boobs, fake or otherwise. Daphne barked at him before she was interrupted by another hard knocking on the door. Oh, for Merlin's sake, she huffed. I'll get it, Harry sing-songed, as he practically skipped back to the door. Opening it the same as with Miss Fake Boobs, or not? Vicey, Harry asked, yes? The young woman on the other side drew herself up and said, Mr. Potter. Lord Potter, interrupted Harry. Looking over her shoulder, Harry could see the delectable Miss Vicey standing back and arrogantly smirking in perceived triumph. Mr. Potter, she tried again. Lord Potter, he interrupted again. With a sigh, she said, Very well. Lord Potter, I'm head girl Melin. No, Harry interrupted, appearing a little panicky. You can't just be turning up at the door of my private carriage and offering me head like that. My fiancée is sitting just over there. He gestured, and she'd kill me if she— Lord Potter, the girl interrupted, spluttering. I assure you, I'm not here offering to give you head. Oh, you want me to give it, do you? Interrupted Harry, pretending to catch on. Sorry, but this tongue is reserved for that lovely— He tried to gesture behind him as he was interrupted back. Lord Potter, the girl angrily interrupted, again as Daphne and whoever else squealed behind him. This girl was really starting to channel that red blush now. I'm not giving or receiving head. Well, I bet that really pisses your boyfriend off, said Harry. Oh, no, sorry. Wait, he mock-spluttered with horror, as the girl looked back with a similar expression. You're aware of the laws surrounding heads of noble houses being able to have more than one wife, and you're here to hint what you'd like to do to me if given a chance. I get it. That's what that head remark was all about. All right, Miss Head, wink wink, girl Melin, I can play that game. I'd like to talk about my broomstick and wonder if you'd like to take a ride on it, wink wink. She slapped him and stormed off. Harry closed the door and turned back to his friends. Well, I think that went very well, don't you? While everyone else, including the girls this time, were laughing, some from embarrassment blushing and trying not to laugh, Hermione walked over and grabbed him by the chin with her left hand. Here, you, she growled, raising her wand and casting a healing charm on the handprint that had sprung up on his cheek. When she finished, she stepped back, glared at him and said, You're incorrigible, you know that? And not waiting for an answer, she spun about and marched back to her chair. People had just started settling down again when there was yet another yelp, male this time, followed by a banging on the door. Harry immediately grinned and started to rise when Daphne snagged him by the back of his robes and yanked him back into his seat. "Oh, no, you don't," she half growled. As Harry tried to straighten himself out, she turned to Blaise and asked, "Blaise, would you mind?" With a grin, Blaise said, "Not at all, milady," and jumped to his feet before hurrying to the door. He hesitated just a moment before yanking the door open and stepping into the gap. Before the boy on the other side could say anything, Blaise called back with a bit of a whine in his voice. "Oh, Merlin, Harry, you were supposed to tell the service we wanted girl prostitutes. They sent us a bloke." "I am not a prostitute," squawked the male voice from beyond the door. "No, no," said Blaise, with his offhand coming up in a placating gesture. "I didn't mean to give offence. What's that term they use these days? Oh, yes, you're a lady's close male companion. That's right, isn't it?" Harry began giggling. He hated when he did that, but it's what he did when he was trying to stifle his laughter. It didn't help that Daphne kept smacking him up the back of the head as he was doing so.
"I am not that either,"
squawked the boy, even more indignant. "Of course not," Blaise scoffed. "You need to be discreet. I understand that. Now, no one here ordered your specialized services, if you know what I mean, so we're sorry you undertook a wasted trip. However, we can make it worth your while. And, you do have the body for it, don't you? There's a girl running about on the train who goes by the name Head Girl Melon. She appears to be quite, in need of a close male companion, if you know what I mean. Could you go and, have a chat with her and this other girl named Iema Prefect, who we think has fake boobs, quite frankly. Both of them and some others wearing nice shiny badges, like you've got there, seem to be operating under the misconception they have a right to enter the private carriage of Lord Potter Slytherin Gryffindor. They don't, of course, but they do seem insistent. I think it might be repressed sexual urges clouding their logical thought centers." Harry had abandoned his seat next to Daphne on the couch to escape getting hit all the time and joined the other guys, including Neville, on the floor of the carriage, rolling around trying not to laugh. "Please go and, said Blaise to the boy on the other side of the door, "be a close male companion to... sorry for them, and do what you do to set them straight on that point, would you? There's a good chap." And he hurriedly closed and latched the door before spinning about and grinning like a loon. With the door finally closed, Harry and the other three boys on the floor were howling with laughter and occasionally getting kicked by one of the girls who were still trying not to laugh. "Who?" chuckled Harry. "Who was that?" "Sixth-year male Ravenclaw prefect," Blaise replied with a smug smirk and a shrug. "Roger Davies, I think." "That was Rog," exclaimed Harry. "Oh, Merlin. He's going to be pissed with me when we get back. I'm going to have to invite him to the wedding by way of apology." It didn't stop him laughing about it, though. The next knock was a while later and was quite a timid one. They almost didn't hear it. Harry said, "I've got this," and walked over to the door. He took a peek out past the blind and saw it was a small group of timid first-year girls from across the houses. He sighed and turned back to the others. "It's a gaggle of female firsties. Now I can be a real mongrel here and scare the life out of them, or I can let them in. What say you?" The Weasley twins were all for scaring the crap out of them, but everyone else was of the opinion he should let them in. With a sad nod, Harry turned back to the door. Opening it, gently, he looked down and smiled. "Ladies," he calmly said, "to what do I owe the pleasure of your visit?" A couple of them looked to another and nudged her a couple times. She said. Harry waited a moment or two before sighing and flinging the door open. "Come in then," he said. They all came in and stood in a tight group in the middle of the floor, looking a little scared. He gently closed the door and walked past them, taking a nearby seat so he wasn't towering over them. Looking to the others, he asked, "Were we ever this small?" "Yep," replied Blaise, adding a smile of his own. "All right, ladies," said Harry, turning back to them. "I take it you came down here to talk to me or ask me a question or two. I promise I won't yell, scream, shout at you, or otherwise tell you off for doing so. So, who's your spokeslady?" He already knew because he saw the girls nudging her earlier. They did it again while the girl stood there, blushing away and trying to get up the courage. Leaning forward with his elbows on his thighs, Harry said to the girl, It's Miss MacDonald, right? Miss Natalie MacDonald? Little Miss MacDonald snapped her head up and stared at Harry in shock and awe. You know my name? She asked, almost squeaked. Yes, I do, said Harry. I watched you being sorted into Gryffindor last September. Wow, she said, and blushed again, before looking down and away. Now, he gently said, where's that Gryffindor courage? We wanted to know if, she stuttered. Harry just sat there and patiently waited. He knew she'd get there sooner or later. But when she hesitated and looked unable to continue, Harry softly said, Gryffindor's forward, Natalie. She nodded. Taking a breath and holding it for a moment, she blurted, We want to know if you have any photographs. We can have. And let the rest of the air she was holding in her lungs out in a loud sigh. Harry chuckled and asked, You mean of me, right? She looked up and nodded before looking down again. Harry glanced over at Daphne and grinned. I've been expecting this, said Harry, sitting back a bit. Congratulations, you're the first to ask. Leaning back forward again, he asked, You know Colin Creevey, right? Dennis Creevey's big brother. She glanced up and nodded. Well, this morning I asked Colin to take some photographs of me dressed really nice. He had his camera with him and took some really nice photographs just this afternoon. If you go and ask him nicely, I'm sure he'll set 1 or 2 aside for you, but you'll have to pay him a small fee for them. All right? Natalie looked up and smiled before blushing and nodding again. Is that all you wanted to ask? He asked. Another hesitation, but she quietly asked, Can you show us that big deer you made appear in the Great Hall again? It's called a Patronus, Natalie, and yes, I can show you again, replied Harry. Would you like me to show you now? Yes, please, she practically begged. Harry chuckled and drew his wand. He gathered his most powerful memory of he and Daphne, one dealing with a particular intimate moment, and cast it down the length of the carriage. Expecto Patronum, he almost whispered. Prongs burst forth from his wand tip on the other side of where the boys were sitting. They moved out of the way to let the Patronus walk back between them. Holding the charm steady with a fair bit of magic pumping into it, he asked the young girl, Would you like to touch him? She nodded and carefully brought her hand forth. Prongs assisted by ducking his head and nuzzling the palm of her hand. As her hand appeared to meet Prongs, she gasped. It tingles, she whispered. It feels really nice. That brought the other young girls around to also touch him. They oohed and ahed and excitedly chattered a little among themselves. He heard one of the young girls whisper to her friend, It makes me feel all funny down there. His eyes widened at the implications of that and blushed as her friend nodded in agreement. When it appeared they had enough and were dropping their hands, he said, Thank you, Prongs, and allowed the form to fade away. Anything else, ladies? He asked them. Most of them shook their heads while young Miss MacDonald said, Thank you, Lord Piotr. Harry interrupted her as she got tongue-tied and said, You were brave enough to ask me questions, Natalie. You can call me Harry. Actually, you can all call me Harry. Now, don't forget to go and see Colin before the train pulls into King's Cross to ask for a photo or 2, otherwise you'll have to wait until September to see him again. Thank you, Harry. She tried to curtsy before the whole lot bolted for the door and let themselves out. When they were gone, Daphne rose, walked over to him, dragged him onto his feet by a fistful of his robes, and snogged him good and proper. When she pulled away, he said, Not that I'm complaining, mind, but what was that for? For proving to me you're going to make a great father, she said, before giving him a huge hug. Shortly before they were to arrive at King's Cross, there was another knock on the door. Harry opened it to see Lee Jordan stand there with a slight smile on his face. Harry exclaimed, Lee, then reached out, snagged the boy by the front of his wind cheater, and dragged him into the carriage, slamming the door behind him. Lee, Harry exclaimed again, and wrapped the boy in a big hug. I've missed you, man, he mock-sobbed. Harry couldn't see the expression on the other boy's face, but it made the twins, Neville and Blaise, crack up laughing. Releasing the boy from his near-crushing hug, he held him by the upper biceps out at arm's length. Why have you forsaken me? He mock-wailed. Bug-eyed and gobsmacked, Lee replied, Jesus, Harry. That had the other boys howling with laughter again. Realizing he'd been well and truly pranked, Lee shrugged off Harry's hand and grumped, Okay, you got me. Harry grinned back, chuckled and moved back to sit with Daphne. Anyone know how much longer we've got before we arrive? I think we just passed Aylesbury, so only about 30 minutes, replied Blaise, looking out the window at the type of scenery they were passing. After chatting with everyone for a while, Lee suggested to the twins they make a move back to their compartment. It would be difficult for them to collect their trunks if they delayed too much longer. The others remained in the owner's carriage until they arrived. Pulling into the station, Harry opened the station side door and found the clip to latch it open. Then he debarked and assisted each of the ladies out of the carriage before helping unload all 9 trunks. He and Neville picked each trunk up and placed them on waiting trolleys as Blaise slid them along the floor to the door. Once they were all out, he turned to see Cygnus, Isabel, Aunt Amelia, Gran, the Devises, and the Abbots all looking at the carriage in surprise, if not a little shock. Seeing their expressions, Harry moved to the open door and said, "Come, hop on board." The parents and guardians all hopped on board and had a look around. "Why wasn't this part of the train when I went to school?" asked Aunt Amelia for all of them. "I believe this was added because I've claimed my Hogwarts lordship," said Harry. "It's the owner's private carriage. I have no idea, however, how it came to be included as part of the train. I didn't organize it." After everyone else had disembarked, and Harry had a good look around to make sure no one left anything behind, Harry stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him. He didn't want anyone coming along later and doing something within it. He then flew back to the Greengrass estate with his family.